You're pitiful, just a dropout kid from the lowest rung. I bet you were raised in poverty and your kid is living at the bottom of society. I understand your perspective. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mary. My life has been a roller coaster, to say the least. When I was about to finish middle school, tragedy struck. I lost both my parents in a short span of time. Coping with such loss, my focus shattered, and I couldn't muster the will to study for exams anymore. Predictably, I failed all my high school entrance exams, even the backups. At 15, I found myself at a crossroads, gap year or workforce. To be honest, I did have aspirations of attending high school, but the family members who took me in were financially strained. Moreover, I felt compelled to preserve my parents' life insurance payout for future needs. Add to that the discomfort of entering high school a year late, and the decision to start working seemed the most practical. I must have been 19 then, in a relationship with John, a colleague at my workplace who was 27 at the time. You're involved with someone much older? Are you sure about this? A man pursuing a 19-year-old, can he truly be responsible? My aunt, a relative, expressed her concern, but youthful and headstrong, I disregarded her advice. John is wonderful. Sure, there's an age gap, but 8 years isn't uncommon, right? Well, if it were 25 and 33, perhaps, but 19 and 27 is quite a difference. What's the difference? Quit talking down about him. With that sentiment in mind, we tied the knot when I turned 20. A few months later, I discovered I was pregnant. Initially, I was overjoyed, but it was short-lived. When I broke the news to John, his response shattered me. What? You're planning to keep it? Seriously? No chance. I can't handle having a child with a dropout. Why should I be burdened with raising a kid who'll end up like you? Why would you say such hurtful things? You knew about my dropout status before we got married, didn't you? Yeah, I suppose, but no, it won't work out. I mean, having a child with a dropout, the child will turn out odd, right? I don't want to raise a kid like that. I also want more freedom. John's words stung, and soon he began avoiding me both at home and at work, pressing for a divorce. Over time, my feelings for him waned, and I eventually consented to the split. However, my job at the time, within a small company, lacked any provision for maternity or paternity leave, leaving me no option but to resign concurrently with the divorce. With the support of my relatives and what remained of my parents' life insurance, I safely delivered my son Jacob, pouring all my love into raising him. Despite the financial strain, I remained healthy after childbirth, juggling multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. By the time Jacob entered elementary school, I secured a full-time position, granting both financial stability and emotional bandwidth. Now, 2 decades have elapsed since those trying times. These days, Jacob and I even indulge in leisurely outings together. Hey, are you perhaps married? Suddenly, a familiar voice pierced through the air, a voice I had hoped to erase from memory. It belonged to John, my ex-husband, the man who deserted me during my pregnancy 2 decades ago. I thought it might be you, Mary. So what brings you to a department store on your day off? Seems a bit upscale for you, John remarked, a smirk playing on his lips. Jacob, likely bewildered by the unexpected encounter, stood quietly, his expression troubled. I figured he might be your new beau, but he looks rather young, doesn't he? Ah, is this the kid from all those years ago? Ah, it's a boy. Well, it's none of my concern anyway, John continued. Indeed, you and I have long parted ways, John. Why are you even speaking to me? Don't be so bitter, Mary. Remember, we used to be deeply in love. Seems like you've turned into quite the cold-hearted woman, haven't you? John's grin held a hint of mockery, as if the past held no significance to him. Then, he uttered something utterly audacious. By the way, is he also a dropout? What? What are you implying? I retorted, taken aback by his insensitivity. Well, I mean, like mother, like son, right? If you dropped out, it's only logical that he would too, isn't it? John's words dripped with disdain. Enough. Stop with your hurtful comments, I snapped, unable to tolerate his callousness any longer. Ah, but he's got my genes, so he must have at least graduated high school, right? Although, in today's world, even with a diploma, you're still scraping the bottom of the barrel, John boasted, dropping the name of a renowned multinational corporation, the kind often plastered across TV screens. Surely, you've heard of this company, Mary. I'm a department head in a major corporation now. I guess you could say I'm part of the elite. he declared. And what would the elite want with someone like me? Are you daft? Do you honestly think I have any interest in someone as ignorant and destitute as you? I only spoke to you out of nostalgia. Frankly, you're nothing but a bother, I shot back, my patience wearing thin. Don't say that, John protested weakly. That's why you'll never achieve anything significant. Ever since you entered my life, my fortunes have changed for the better. I was recruited by a prestigious corporation, and my career has been skyrocketing ever since. Life is certainly smoother without someone like you bringing bad luck. So, I'm a bad omen to you, John? If that's the case, perhaps it's best if you refrain from contacting me altogether. No, sometimes I'd just like to glance at the bottom of the barrel to remind myself of how fortunate I am. You see, in my workplace, there's no one quite like you, not even among the lowest-ranked employees. But it's true what they say about poverty. It's like a vortex, pulling you down no matter what. Is that all you wanted to say? We're pressed for time, I interjected, urging John to get to the point. Just a moment, let me have a word with my son, John replied casually, placing a hand on Jacob's shoulder with a self-satisfied grin. Then, with a smile still lingering on his face, he addressed Jacob. Life may be tough for you too, but it is what it is. Blame your mother for her poverty and lack of education. If you're looking for someone to resent, point it towards her for having you straight out of middle school. John's expression radiated satisfaction as he glanced around. John, what's taking so long? The restroom was crowded, I inquired, wondering why he was lingering. Oh, I just bumped into someone from the past, John replied casually, as if nothing significant had occurred. At that moment, his wife or girlfriend joined him, a striking woman who seemed intimately connected to John. Can you believe it? This woman dropped out of high school midway through. Not even a high school graduate, but a middle school dropout. Can you imagine? John boasted, his tone dripping with condescension. And her son is likely to follow suit, destined for the bottom rung of society. Aren't you glad you didn't have to endure such a dismal existence? You're fortunate to have landed a high achiever like me, he continued, oblivious to our presence as if we were invisible. However, the woman seemed to take notice of Jacob when he lifted his head. Peering up from her books, her expression turned startled. She pointed at him, her hand trembling uncontrollably. Isn't he? What's the matter? I asked, perplexed by her sudden reaction. Isn't that the president of one of our major clients? She exclaimed. Startled by her outburst, John pivoted around. The moment his gaze landed on Jacob's face, his eyes widened in recognition. Seeing this reaction, Jacob slowly spoke up. I heard your company's name earlier, but upon seeing your face, I suspected it might be you. Indeed, you are the one. Thank you for your hospitality at that dinner the other day. Oh, that. Mr. Jacob, you seemed quite reserved during our dinner. It's quite surprising to witness you publicly criticizing others, labeling them as low-life and uneducated at your whim. Quite impolite of you, isn't it? The woman Lily remarked with a touch of reproach. No, that's... Lily, why didn't you inform me? John interjected, his tone tinged with frustration. I couldn't get a good look at him. Plus, I work in a different department. I can't possibly remember all the clients' faces, Lily defended herself, her voice tinged with apprehension. Useless. What did you just say? John snapped, the tension between him and Lily escalating rapidly. However, Jacob remained unfazed by their argument and spoke up calmly. Well, I'm not particularly interested in your quarrel. I now have a clearer understanding of the director's usual approach. We were in talks about implementing our system in your company, but let's abandon that idea. No, please wait, this is all just a misunderstanding, Jacob interjected, his voice tinged with urgency. Misunderstanding? How is it a misunderstanding when you publicly insulted me? John retorted, his tone laced with indignation. Well, you see, Jacob faltered, struggling to find the right words to explain himself. Mary, this is your fault, John interjected suddenly, redirecting the blame. What? How is this my fault? Mary questioned, bewildered by John's accusation. Because, why on earth would someone like you, a high school dropout, be with Mr. Jacob? Do you even realize who he is? He founded a business while still in college and holds numerous patents. The system he developed is so advanced that major companies are vying to adopt it, John explained, his voice dripping with condescension. Is that so? And why are you with him when you didn't even know that? Mary countered, her tone tinged with skepticism. I'm not quite sure. I don't typically discuss work matters with my son, John replied. He sat down. Your son? Mary echoed, her tone reflecting surprise. Yes, that's correct. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I am Jacob, the prodigy, son of the high school dropout. Jacob interjected confidently. Well, that's, John stammered, caught off guard by Jacob's assertion. It seems you have something on your mind regarding my mother. Please feel free to express yourself. We likely won't have another chance to converse, Jacob encouraged, his tone composed. Oh, well, what's the situation here? How come someone like you? Why is someone like Jacob's mother, a high school dropout? John stumbled over his words, struggling to articulate his thoughts. John faltered, taken aback by Jacob's unexpected interjection. He appeared torn, as if he wanted to retort but found himself at a loss for words. His gaze shifted uneasily between Mary and Jacob. From my earliest memories, my mother instilled in me a wealth of knowledge. Despite her lack of formal education beyond middle school, she delved into countless books and shared their wisdom with me, Jacob continued, his voice steady and composed. What? I never knew Mary possessed such depth, John muttered, visibly surprised. But there was one subject my mother remained silent on, the criticisms of my father, who abandoned us during her pregnancy. I've harbored resentment towards my father for as long as I can remember, but my mother always insisted it was her own naivety that led to our struggles. Even in our most dire circumstances, when we had nothing and were barely scraping by, she maintained a radiant smile. She's the person I admire most, Jacob recounted, his voice tinged with reverence. So you hold her in high regard, but Mr. Jacob, you share my bloodline, don't you? Can't you consider signing a contract with my company? John pressed, his tone pleading. Yes, I could. However, what's truly unacceptable here is your behavior. We're in a public setting, you know. Have you not considered the embarrassment you're causing? Jacob countered, his tone firm. Well, that's just my honest opinion. I simply perceive Mary as lacking in intelligence, that's all, John retorted, his tone unapologetic. And what does that make you, the man who fathered a child with this woman you call stupid? What kind of person does that make you, abandoning her when she was so young? Maybe she was innocent, but do you have any idea of the hardships she endured? You seem proud of your position in a big company, but why didn't you contribute even a single cent in child support? Jacob's accusations hung heavy in the air, leaving John speechless. As Jacob's words sank in, Lily's expression transformed. From a troubled look, her face now bore a glare directed squarely at John. Wait a minute, that's not what you told me. No, you just be quiet. That can't be true. Didn't you share with me that your previous wife cheated on you and left, that she denied you access to your child, and even refused your attempts to provide child support, forcing you to save instead? Was that entire story just a fabrication? Lily's voice was edged with disbelief and accusation. It seems highly likely that it was a fabrication. My mother and I still reside with our relatives. He knows where we are if he truly intended to provide child support. Mom, has this man ever attempted to contact you? Jacob inquired. Not once. Not on my cell phone. Not at any relative's house. And certainly, there's been no mention of child support, Mary confirmed, her tone tinged with disappointment. My revelation seemed to ignite fury in Lily, while John's complexion drained of color. You lied. You're despicable. I'm relieved I didn't marry you. It's over between us, Lily declared, her voice trembling with anger. What? Wait, Lily, please don't go, John pleaded, desperation evident in his tone. John hastily pursued Lily, leaving Jacob and me to exchange a knowing glance before erupting into laughter. John's pitiful demeanor was simply too amusing to ignore. Afterward, we indulged in some window shopping, feeling thoroughly content as we headed home. Later, Jacob filled me in on the situation. His company and John's were on the verge of sealing a significant contract, but Jacob opted to pull out at the 11th hour. Apparently, he was entirely transparent about his reasons. Your representative was my father, the man who abandoned my pregnant mother and neglected to provide child support. It's inconceivable to trust such an individual and engage in business with him. The system I've developed is akin to my own offspring. Entrusting it to him, just the thought makes my skin crawl. Predictably, this turn of events stirred up considerable turmoil. Allegedly, the company penalized John by demoting him and sidelining his role. It appears they're hoping to coax Jacob into reconsidering the contracts by making an example of John. From Jacob's perspective, it seems he might entertain the idea if they slash John's bonus. Undoubtedly, John is about to face some challenging times, but perhaps it's what he deserves, isn't it? At 48, he only has to weather another 12 years until retirement. My mom endured much harsher circumstances for far longer. When you put it into perspective, this isn't all that tough. Jacob's expression was one of genuine anger as he voiced these sentiments. I empathize with his emotions, so I have no intention of intervening. In his desperation, John has sought refuge at our relative's home. With a deep bow at the entrance, he pleads desperately. I'm deeply sorry for what I did in the past. I lied about providing child support, but I do have savings now. I'm willing to offer Jacob the equivalent of child support as a gift while I'm alive. I'll even compensate Mary if necessary. Please reconsider, John implored. However, Jacob refused to entertain such propositions. Turning to John, he stated firmly, I have no interest in your savings now. Our hardships belong to the past. You didn't support us then, and now you only seek to save yourself. That's unacceptable. I apologize. I was young and foolish. Please forgive me, John pleaded, his voice tinged with remorse. Those who genuinely regret their actions wouldn't dangle compensation as a bargaining chip. Your selfishness knows no bounds. Please leave. If you return to this house, I won't hesitate to involve the authorities. Wouldn't that further jeopardize your position at the company? Jacob's words struck a chord, prompting John to flee in a panicked frenzy. Thanks to Jacob's intervention, it's unlikely John will darken our doorstep again. We can look forward to peaceful days ahead. Currently, Jacob is focused on completing all his college credits. But once that's accomplished, he plans to treat the entire family to a trip to a hot springs resort. Despite my protests, Jacob insists on repaying our support. If that's his wish, we'll gratefully accept his generosity. Surely, we'll enjoy a wonderful time on that trip. Hey, the high school dropout, still rocking that pathetic style, huh? Well, let me treat you to some fine wine today. At the reunion, I bumped into a classmate who used to mock me for being poor back in school. Despite us both being grown adults now, the moment he spotted me, he unbelievably held his wine glass over my head and poured the wine all over me. The rich aroma clung to my entire body, leaving me feeling terrible. How about that? Bet you're thrilled to get a taste of the high life, high school dropout. This guy hasn't changed one bit since those days. I was beyond angry, filled with disappointment. I've made up my mind, decided about what I declared something ruthless to the classmate who mocked me. Then his eyes widened and his face turned pale rapidly. Well then, let's start my counterattack in full. My name is Kevin. Raised in a typical family with a self-employed father and a stay-at-home mother, my childhood was free from significant hardships. After school, I tossed my backpack and play in the neighborhood park with friends until dusk. But things changed when I entered middle school. My father stopped coming home due to his work. It was normal for my dad to come home after I had gone to bed and leave early in the morning. I just assumed it was normal for him not to be around much. But on his rare days off, he did try to provide some family time, like going for drives nearby or taking us to amusement parks. And then it was just my mom and me. Mom, are you okay? One late night as I got up to use the bathroom, I saw her sighing repeatedly while looking at the household budget book. Yeah, I'm fine. You don't have to worry about anything, she said with a smile. But her face was visibly worn. Lately, there had been changes at the dinner table. The number of side dishes had decreased, and the fruits that used to be a staple were now gone. The lunches she packed for me each morning also changed, mostly just plain rice with a small amount of pickles or simmered dishes. One day, Brad caught sight of my meager lunch and started picking on me. Your dad ran off in the night, leaving your family behind, didn't he? I heard it from my dad. That's why you bring such lame lunches, right? It's hilarious, he said, laughing with his cronies. I was so angry I almost lashed out, but the image of my mom's smiling face came to mind and I clenched my fists to hold back. I don't want to cause trouble for Mom. Brad was the son of the president of Bradley Merchandising, a well-known food company in the area, and was seen by teachers as a model student due to his good behavior. In reality, however, he was a terrible guy who used his father's status and connections to bully others. If anyone stood up to him, they became his target. Fearing this, my classmates gradually distanced themselves from me, turning a blind eye to how I was treated. Encouraged by this, Brad's teasing only escalated, and finally, I reached my breaking point. It was lunchtime as usual. I sat in my usual spot, a secluded corner of the staircase, eating my lunch. "Hey, who's Kevin?" Brad yelled. "Yo, Brad," I replied. Brad approached me with a sneering smile. I usually ignored him, but he didn't like that and took an unexpected action. "Typical peasant's lunch looks as bad as ever," he said, reaching for my lunchbox. "Hey, what are you doing?" I impulsively knocked Brad's hand away. "Ouch, you sorry," but he suddenly reached for it. Then Brad snatched my lunchbox and slammed it onto the floor. The rice and leftover meat and potatoes from last night scattered in a sad mess. I pictured my mother's sad face. "What the heck are you doing?" I shouted, grabbing Brad by the collar. "Think you can hit me?" "You know what'll happen if you do," he said with a smug look, seeing his triumphant face. I lost all restraint. Before I knew it, I was on top of Brad, his handsome face red and swollen, his lips split. Both of us were breathing heavily. "You'll pay for this." Brad's voice trembled. "Hey, what are you two doing?" A teacher from student discipline, alerted by the commotion, yelled fiercely and dragged us to the guidance office. "I'm so sorry," my mother said, her face pale, bowing repeatedly. "This is unacceptable, causing such a disturbance at school." The teacher with a characteristically shiny face and bulging eyes scolded us. No matter how many times I explained, the teacher wouldn't listen, instead fully believing Brad's fabricated story. Brad, as if nothing had happened, vilified me as a violent person. Being the son of a well-known local businessman, he was untouchably supported, facing no consequences. Faced with this blatant injustice, all I could do was endure. After the hellish guidance session, as my mother and I were leaving, the teacher spat out at me. "I'm worried about what kind of adult you'll become, always resorting to violence. Can you even become a decent person? Just you watch." But our life became increasingly difficult, with my mom's part-time job not enough to make ends meet. Despite the violent incident with Brad, my mom believed in me to the end. Always kind, my mom was someone I didn't want to burden any further. So with a sole desire to ease her burden, I decided not to pursue college and instead chose to work. Decades have since passed, days whizzing by, seasons changing rapidly, and society evolving at a dizzying pace, brimming with new conveniences. Before I knew it, the familiar streets had transformed, and my bitter, dark adolescent years seemed to fade into the distance. It was around this time that I received an invitation to a middle school reunion. When I saw that letter, the image of Brad's sneering face came back to me. He would undoubtedly be there. Honestly, I wasn't keen on going. But we were all grown-ups now, surely he wouldn't start anything petty. With that thought, I decided to attend. "Hey Kev, long time no see. You look good." Being called by my nickname by a classmate felt like I was back in middle school. While many had drifted apart after the violence, a few classmates who remained friends through it all were there, and he was one of them. "Man, you've aged a bit, haven't you?" he said, patting his protruding belly. "You too." As we shared updates and reminisced, a familiar voice rang out. "Hey, you're here too, huh? Wow, Brad, that's you." He seemed quite drunk and was in high spirits. "Brad, you okay?" I was surprised at myself for expressing concern. But Brad, glaring fiercely, retorted, "A bottom feeder like you worrying about me?" I hadn't fallen that low. "Listen up," holding a wine glass, he boasted. "I run Bradley Merchandising. It's wise to stay on my good side." He laughed arrogantly, then peering into my face, he exclaimed, "Hey, the high school dropout, still rocking that pathetic style, huh? Well, let me treat you to some fine wine today." And with that, Brad held his wine glass over my head and poured the wine all over me. The surrounding crowd went silent, staring at us in a scene of total chaos. The reunion was completely ruined. The rich aroma clung to my entire body, leaving me feeling terrible. How about that? Bet you're thrilled to get a taste of the high life, high school dropout. He hadn't changed a bit from the times he used his privileged position to cause trouble. I was beyond angry, filled with disappointment, all my secret hopes shattered. "Brad, have made up my mind, decided about what to do." To Brad's mocking face, I delivered a stark announcement. "You're fired." The room fell silent for a moment. "Fired? What's that supposed to mean? High school dropout? Can't even speak English? Brad asked, clearly baffled. But I said seriously, it means exactly what it sounds like. The crowd began to murmur. A former classmate tapped my shoulder and asked a question that seemed to float in everyone's mind. So what do you do now? I currently work at a food company as renowned as Bradley Merchandising. Wiping my head and face with a handkerchief I took from my pocket, I started explaining. I'm in charge of corporate acquisitions, and I'm actually working on acquiring your company as the next president. You should know this better than anyone. What? What are you talking about? Brad, trying to act tough, had his lips twitching and sweat on his forehead. President Johnson should have officially contacted you about this, right? Johnson? President? Brad's face turned completely pale. Yes, I work for Johnson Merchandising, a company my father is the president of. After high school, I joined this company and now serve as an executive director, overseeing the entire company. Deciding not to pursue college and instead work was tough, as there were hardly any companies willing to hire someone with only a high school education. I couldn't afford to be choosy anymore. I applied for any job I could find and ended up working part-time at a logistics warehouse. However, the barrier due to my lack of education was thicker than I imagined. Once people learned about my educational background, their attitudes changed, and I was never considered for permanent employment. Would my life end just as a factory Tim, lost in despair? I was returning home from work one day. When I encountered the unexpected, I arrived home to find my father, whom I never thought I'd see again. He looked much older, with white hair mixed in. Despite his weak smile, the sight of him brought a surge of anger, thinking of all the hardships we endured. You just waltz back now. You have no idea how much we suffered. Then my father tearfully apologized. I'm sorry, honey Kevin. I'm truly sorry. I was so focused on getting the company on track that I neglected you. No excuse can change the fact that I caused you unnecessary hardship. I'm deeply sorry. My mother and I, without a word, just stared at him. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I want to at least apologize to you both in some way, he said. The house was completely silent. Eventually, my mother spoke up. Regardless, I'm thankful you've come back. Things might not go back to how they were, but I do want to try and rebuild our family little by little. But there's a condition. What is it? My father asked. Give this boy a full-time job at your company, my mother said, surprising me. Kevin has been working hard since he decided not to go to high school. He should be enjoying his youth like others his age, but due to his educational background, he struggled to find a full-time position. My mother's face was serious, almost frighteningly so. How much time had passed? I wondered. All right, my father said. Kevin can work at our company, but on one condition. He must take the GED. Understand? There was a sense of earnestness in my father's voice, his concern for my future evident, considering the circumstances. Having to give up high school to work, I stepped up from a factory temp to an employee at a renowned company. Of course, it wasn't easy at first. In fact, it was a continuous struggle. Being the president's son made me a target of envy, and I was often harshly criticized for even minor mistakes. Being new to corporate life, I struggled with understanding business etiquette and social norms. Sweating through every new challenge, my colleagues would just scoff, offering no help. I felt completely isolated at work. Despite this, I worked tirelessly, volunteering for menial tasks and responding earnestly to unreasonable demands from superiors. Seeing documents I worked hard on being thrown into the trash with a smirk, or finding my desk littered with trash, I often thought about quitting. It was disheartening to be judged through the lens of being the president's son. Despite all my efforts, what kept me going was my mother's presence. The mixed emotions she must have swallowed when she asked for me to be hired at my father's company must have been excruciating. For her sake, I had to meet the company's expectations. As I continued to work relentlessly, gradually, people began to recognize my efforts. Slowly, I was accepted as a team member, and this began to reflect in my work results. It possibly provided a healthy stimulus for other employees as the company's sales started to rise year by year. As a result of my hard work, I was recognized and promoted. From this year, I became an executive director entrusted with important tasks. I have been involved in negotiations for the acquisition of Bradley Merchandising, a company that had been on a downward spiral for several years. Kev, you've made an incredible rise through the ranks. Never thought we'd have an executive director among our classmates. It's going to be awkward just casually inviting you out now. My unexpected identity caused a stir among the crowd. But Brad, still in disbelief, insisted, "Stop lying. I don't accept such a tall tale." Well, it seems your dad, the president, didn't share much about the company's situation with you. It's not surprising you didn't know. But my father was going to make me president. About that, I said, my expression serious. My father instructed me to overhaul the entire management of Bradley Merchandising, from the president down. That's impossible. Brad's face froze. But I didn't have enough evidence to make such a drastic decision. Then I heard about the reunion and remembered. You were supposed to be the next president. I thought it wouldn't be too late to meet and talk here, but as I let out a breath, releasing the disappointment welling up inside, Brad, you hadn't changed at all. Still belittling and blaming others, still full of baseless confidence. That doesn't mean you can fire me. Come on, help me out. We're classmates, right? His attitude had changed drastically from his earlier arrogance, now desperately pleading. But I wasn't going to soften my stance over something like this. I just made a logical decision as a business leader. Running a company isn't as easy as you think, I said firmly, grabbing Brad's shoulders and looking him in the eye. I faced many challenges as the president's son, but I never gave up because this company was my only path. You had more advantages, attending a good high school and graduating from college. It's time you put in real effort for once in your life. Tears held back, my voice shaking as I spoke to Brad, but he just stared back in silence, not uttering a word. A month after the reunion, I stood in front of the Bradley Merchandising building with my father. Today, we'll officially proceed with the acquisition. I had confided in my father the day before, and after some reluctance, he agreed to my terms. We've been waiting for you, said the president of Bradley Merchandising, greeting us as he entered the meeting room, followed by his son, Brad. Bradley spoke of his intentions to have Brad succeed him as president. Now, about the acquisition, he prompted me to start the discussion, but Brad's behavior was appalling, far from what one would expect from a future president or even a professional. I raised my voice. Hey, Brad, are you even listening? This is about the future of the company. You even realize the responsibilities of a president? I don't need to hear that from you, Brad retorted. Then he turned to his father, saying something outrageous. Dad, are you sure it's okay to trust our company to someone who just climbed up using his parents' influence? Brad's suggestion that he was more capable of making beneficial decisions for the company seemed almost delusional. My father, witnessing this, clearly showed a look of exasperation. Even the usually stern face of Bradley grew more severe. Fool. What do you know about our company? He said, his temples throbbing with anger. Brad could only stare back with an expression I had never seen before. Bradley continued unabated by his anger. Kevin's right. Your attitude today is beyond disrespectful. Running a company is not a game. If you're not serious, then leave. Brad's voice was pitifully weak in response to his father's overwhelming presence. The president then stood up, facing us with a serious expression. I apologize for this disgraceful display. I've been too indulgent with my son, expecting him to become more responsible in the workforce. But I was mistaken. I never imagined he would behave so foolishly, especially in such a setting. To you, the executive director of Johnson Merchandising, and you, Kevin, I apologize for his many discordances. As a parent, I am truly sorry. My father then addressed Bradley. Your feelings are clear, Bradley. The once imposing figure of the food company's president seemed utterly diminished. Bradley, with a desperate look, continued, President Kevin, we need your help to save Bradley Merchandising. We no longer have the strength to continue on our own. If we come under your company's wing, I will step down from all my management roles, and the same goes for the entire board. But please keep our employees, our precious staff, without letting anyone go. With that, he bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched the table. I looked at my father, who seemed deep in thought, his eyes closed. Dad, I murmured quietly. He nodded solemnly. Bradley, I began, yes, I see how much you care about your company. Given that, let's give you another chance to turn things around. Brad and his father looked shocked. Yes, a chance. If you genuinely care about your employees, there's still something to be done. We'll support you as much as we can. If that fails, we have no choice but to take over completely. Kevin, how can I ever thank you? Beside his tearful father, Brad looked completely drained, as if all the strength had left his body. I continued speaking, lancing between the two. I've always resented my father, I began, causing a look of shock in Brad. He neglected our family under the guise of work, forcing me to give up high school. I aimed to prove him wrong. But my mother, who suffered the most, forgave him. I still vividly remember my mother's resolute face when she chose to forgive. At first, I couldn't understand her. But now I get why she decided to forgive. She taught me the importance of it. I heard my father murmur softly. Kevin said, I am who I am today because my mother forgave my father, and recently, I finally felt like I can forgive him too. Bradley nodded in agreement, feeling as if pushed forward by an invisible force. I continued my thoughts. Everyone deserves a second chance. People become stronger by overcoming adversity, I said, turning to Brad, who was slouched back in his chair with a sulky demeanor. Brad, it starts here. Isn't this your time to step up? But I don't know anything about running a company, Brad muttered. I placed my hand on his shoulder. It's okay to start now. Work hard, and the results will follow, Brad, I reassured him. Brad looked at me, a faint smile on his face. For the first time after countless discussions, Bradley Merchandising agreed to a business partnership with Johnson Merchandising and began the path to recovery. Brad became the new president with his father as an advisor. Shedding the pride of being the son of Bradley Merchandising, Brad worked tirelessly to regain the trust of each business partner through humble visits. His transformation inspired the employees, and their mindset began to shift. The company, once complacent under the guise of a large corporation and marred by internal power struggles, saw employees stand up to the challenge. Sales put more effort into their work, and the administration focused on creating a welcoming environment for business partners. Brad notably enhanced working conditions by revising inclusive welfare policies and eliminating exclusive systems, contributing to a significant turnaround for the formerly struggling Bradley Merchandising. Encouraged by the changes in everyone, including Brad, the company's sales gradually climbed like ascending stairs. This year, we were even able to provide bonuses to all employees, albeit modest ones. Similarly, our company's performance improved significantly, and we've now reached a point where we can sponsor various advertising campaigns. The reunion became a catalyst for rekindling friendships with classmates, I reflected. Initially wary of Brad, they were now impressed by his transformation, sharing jokes and laughter. Hey, can we drop the president title when we're off work? I teased. It's just a habit, Brad said, scratching his head in embarrassment. Then at least call me by my old nickname when we're not working. I forgot what it was. You used to call me that all the time. Can't believe you remember that, Brad said, feigning exasperation. All right, how about this? From now on, every time you call me president, you owe me a drink, I proposed with a smile. That's a good idea. Okay, Kev, Brad agreed, stopping in his tracks and calling me by the nostalgic nickname. Thanks, Kev. Human nature tends to cling to negative emotions, and I've been no exception. I resented being looked down upon for being a high school dropout and felt bitter about my social standing. If I hadn't forgiven my father, I might not have reached out to Brad and others. Despite all the harassment from Brad, I couldn't give up on him. Remembering my own struggles, I realized that people who overcome hardships can face any challenge ahead. If you strongly desire to start over, you can change from that point. I plan to lead the company humbly, navigating the challenges of business with dedication alongside my valuable friends and colleagues. I wanted to support my husband, even if his mom treated me poorly like a servant, and even if he didn't stand up for me. But things changed when his favorite brother got hurt and became half paralyzed. My husband started making fun of him, and even teamed up with his mom to make fun of me. That's when I decided I wouldn't take it anymore. Holding my brother-in-law's hand, I promised to get back at my husband and mother-in-law. My name's Mia, and I live with my husband Kent while we work together. I feel really overwhelmed because I have a ton of work to do at home and with my job, and I never get any time for myself. It's because my in-laws, who live nearby, keep asking for my help. Even though my husband and I both work, he never helps with the housework. My mother-in-law treats me more like a maid than a daughter-in-law. Mia, Today you need to take your brother-in-law to the hospital. My mother-in-law calls me early in the morning on my day off. I'm supposed to take care of my brother-in-law's daily needs when I'm not working. Before, I was basically forced to drive him around like a taxi, but now I'm looking after him because he's half paralyzed. I'm always sorry, Mia, my brother-in-law said apologetically, but I shook my head. I'm doing it because I want to, so please don't worry, I replied smiling, but his expression seemed troubled. Before the accident, he was my mother-in-law's favorite. He graduated from a great university, landed a job at a big company, and was kind and gentle to everyone. It seemed like my mother-in-law only had eyes for him, as if he were her only son, leaving my husband, the second son, feeling ignored. Sometimes I got mad at my mother-in-law for treating my husband unfairly. That's why I always wanted to support him. But things changed drastically when my brother-in-law, who used to be so successful, ended up in a wheelchair after the accident. I honestly wish he'd leave already. Being disabled and unable to earn money is bringing shame to the family. My mother-in-law's words were harsh, considering all the help my brother-in-law had given us. She treated him like he didn't belong, which was incredibly cruel. And to make it worse, my husband started joining in, mocking my brother-in-law along with my mother-in-law. So he's paralyzed and can't even move a hand, huh? Doesn't matter if you went to a fancy university, once you can't walk, it's all downhill from there, right? When I thought about my brother-in-law, unable to move his legs because of the accident, I couldn't fathom how they could say such things. Unlike my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law was kind to my husband too. But despite that, my husband's remarks only made things harder for my brother-in-law. After all the hospital visits, I hope he'll move out soon. We can take care of my mom ourselves, and he's just a burden now, a disabled person who can't contribute anything. My husband's words were hurtful, and I found myself arguing with him. I reminded him of all the things my brother-in-law had done for us in the past, and that his injuries were just the result of a terrible accident. We shouldn't speak about him like that, especially since he treated my husband equally. I also opened up about how I'd been treated by my mother-in-law all this time. I endured verbal abuse and was made to run errands on my days off. But I went along with it because I hoped my mother-in-law would change her attitude toward my husband and maybe even acknowledge me a little. But no matter how much I pleaded, my husband didn't seem to understand. Since my brother-in-law's accident, my husband suddenly became the priority for my mother-in-law, who used to dismiss him. It was understandable that he'd feel happy about it, but for me, I just couldn't relate. The sudden and extreme change in her attitude was shocking. My mother-in-law was never easy to deal with, but I never expected my husband to change so drastically. Looking back, my husband often left all the household chores to me, but I believed he was making efforts in his own way. That's why his sudden change in attitude was so shocking and upsetting. One day, while feeling frustrated with my husband and mother-in-law, my husband suggested a family trip. I was thinking we could go to Hawaii for a change of scenery and have some fun, he said. As a working couple, we could afford a trip, but what about my brother-in-law who couldn't join us? Would he be left alone at home? When I voiced my concerns, I learned that a helper would be hired while we were away. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt for my brother-in-law and started worrying if I could even enjoy the trip. A little something to look forward to wouldn't hurt, my brother-in-law said a few days later, sensing my struggle with my husband's idea. I heard about the trip. Don't worry about me. Go and enjoy yourself. You've always been there for me during the hospital visits and everything else. It's time for you to relax and have some fun. His kindness touched me, and I joked that going on a trip with my husband and mother-in-law might be more exhausting than usual, which made my brother-in-law laugh. Encouraged by his words, I told my husband we should go ahead with the trip, and we began preparing for our Hawaii adventure. I took charge of planning the itinerary and dealing with the travel agency. My mother-in-law kept changing her hotel and activity preferences, making it a bit challenging to finalize the plans. But finally, 2 weeks before our departure, everything for our Hawaii trip was set. As soon as we landed in Hawaii, I made a decision to separate from my husband and mother-in-law. I had already felt used even before the trip, so I had planned for this moment. Plus, I needed some time alone, which I had been longing for since the days leading up to our departure. Most of my effort went into helping my mother-in-law prepare for the trip. I'd rush to buy the things she needed after work, and on my days off, I'd take her to the store so she could pick out what she wanted. These shopping trips with my mother-in-law would easily take up 4 hours each time. The 2 weeks before our departure were packed with this and assisting my brother-in-law with his hospital visits. Then, on the day of the trip, my husband and mother-in-law chuckled and told me, "You stay and take care of your brother." Those words left me speechless and utterly stunned. "Since I usually take care of my son, this time it's your turn. Hiring a helper costs money, but you do it for free," my husband and mother-in-law joked, laughing it off. Their demeanor left me feeling no anger anymore. They left for the airport without me, and I stood frozen in place even after their car vanished from sight. Once back home, I used the spare key to enter my in-laws' house. I found my brother-in-law lying down in the living room and told him about what had just occurred. "I'm sorry for suggesting the trip, but I never imagined it would turn out like this," I told my apologetic brother-in-law, reassuring him that this outcome was probably for the best. I hadn't expected much from my mother-in-law to begin with, but this incident also revealed my husband's true colors. I struggled to put my feelings into words, but at that point, I didn't really care anymore. As I glanced down at my brother-in-law's immobile lower body and left hand, I suddenly saw him rise to his feet. It was shocking because he wasn't supposed to be able to move like that. "What's happening? How are you standing?" I blurted out in surprise. Unable to contain my astonishment, I asked my brother-in-law, who then explained that he wasn't permanently paralyzed. It turns out, he had been wanting to put an end to my mother-in-law's excessive interference for a while. He had chosen to stay at the family home because he couldn't afford to live on his own. "I'm barely making ends meet," he explained. When my mother-in-law insisted on him staying, he felt pressured to comply, fearing it might cause trouble for my husband and me. "My mother spends money recklessly. I thought my life would be ruined if things continued like this." I was naive at the time of the accident, he admitted. He had been contemplating how to break free from his mother's hold without causing issues for us. The turning point came when he pretended to be paralyzed and unable to walk. That's when my mother-in-law's attitude towards him changed. And just as he was wondering what to do next, my mother-in-law began favoring my husband. Listening to his story, I couldn't help but feel genuinely sorry for my brother-in-law. "It's really frustrating, isn't it?" I replied with a wry smile, and my brother-in-law returned the smile. "Well, shall we fight back then? What do you think? You can join in, Mia," he suggested. I had no intention of letting things end like this. This whole situation had disgusted me with my husband and mother-in-law. So of course I agreed to my brother-in-law's proposal. 1 week later, my mother-in-law and husband returned from Hawaii. As soon as they arrived home, my husband called me. "Hey, where are my things?" The apartment was empty when I got back. I explained that I had sent his belongings to my in-laws' house. "I made it so you can live with your mother like you've always wanted," I tearfully told him. But instead of understanding, he started complaining about how I moved his stuff without permission. Ignoring his reaction, I told him I want a divorce. "This is too selfish." He was taken aback, demanding to know what had come over me and who was the selfish one. Finally finding my voice, I confronted him about his betrayal of my trust and how much I had endured for him. And during the preparations for the move, even more of his wrongdoing came to light. It turns out he was secretly giving money to my mother-in-law without telling me. Looking back, my mother-in-law's extravagant shopping habits continued even after my brother-in-law quit his job. I had always assumed he was the one funding her spending, but it turns out he had significantly cut back on his expenses after leaving his job. That meant my mother-in-law must have been getting money from someone else, and the only likely candidate was my husband. "You need to repay the money you've been spending without my knowledge. I know $22,000 have gone missing in the past few months," I told him firmly. In response, my husband offered weak excuses, but nothing he said seemed to justify what he had done. Realizing that everything I said was true, he couldn't come up with any valid reasons. I informed him that my brother-in-law had already moved out, and I was living in a new place. I made it clear that neither my brother-in-law nor I wanted anything to do with him or his mother anymore. "It's best for you to go live with your parents. Your family seems to only consist of your mother-in-law, right?" I said before hanging up, but my husband's angry voice cut through. "You're so insolent. I should have divorced you long ago, just like my mother said," he shouted. Even in that moment, he brought up his mother. Though it was my honest feeling, his words felt like a relief. His straightforward declaration of divorce was appreciated. Shortly after, a pre-filled divorce form arrived from my husband's end. I submitted it to the city office and sorted out the financial matters swiftly. Finally, I was free, but this was just the beginning. I've submitted the divorce papers. I informed him over the phone. His response was curt. Now that I don't have a nagging wife and a disabled brother around, things will be much better for me. This is the best outcome, huh? He laughed. I laughed too, adding, your brother-in-law has semi-retired and is enjoying life abroad. And did you know he wasn't actually paralyzed? Oh, and your mother-in-law has some debts, so good luck with that. I thought I heard him say, huh. But I hung up, blocked his number, and decided he was just a stranger now, someone I didn't need to care about anymore. A month later, I received a letter from my ex-husband, Kent, sent through a lawyer. The letter was a mix of complaints, apologies, and an unthinkable proposal to remarry me. I'd often wish you were still with me. My salary alone can't support my mother anymore. It's impossible, he lamented in the letter. It was filled with such absurd concerns, and I could almost sense the traces of tears in his words, which made me feel nauseous. I promptly threw the letter away. It appeared that my ex-husband had lost all his assets trying to repay my mother-in-law's debts. Yet it wasn't enough, and they ended up losing the family home. As for my mother-in-law, she was desperately searching for my brother-in-law, who had gone overseas. According to my brother-in-law, she had been reaching out to his acquaintances and former colleagues. Despite her efforts, none of them intended to disclose his whereabouts. And even if she did find out, she wouldn't be able to go there. This situation was putting my second son at risk. I want to see my older son, she reportedly said, but none of my brother-in-law's acquaintances were willing to help her. It seems that life with Kent has been quite challenging for my mother-in-law since the divorce. Meanwhile, I've been enjoying a peaceful life in my new single-person apartment. It's remarkably calm compared to the chaos of before. It's been a year since the divorce, and for the last 6 months, I haven't heard a word from my ex-husband. Then today, I received an email from my brother-in-law abroad after a long silence. The email contained news that my mother-in-law had finally gone bankrupt, her name even listed in the official Gazette. Curious, I did some digging and discovered that Kent and my mother-in-law are now cohabiting in a small one-room apartment. Needless to say, they're not getting along. Kent is struggling to make ends meet and is drowning in debt, all because of my mother-in-law's uncontrollable spending habits. The sight of them disgusts me, but strangely, recalling the past doesn't fill me with anger anymore. It seems the revenge my brother-in-law and I carried out, what we called a counterattack, has had more than enough effect.